Hello and welcome to today's webinar organized by GBC Health, Corporate Alliance on Malaria in Africa, CAMA. I am Ochuko Keyamo Onyige, Director of CAMA. CAMA is a unique coalition of companies from various industries working together to drive impact and end malaria in Africa. We do this in part by creating platforms like this to learn from each other, to share experiences and to collaborate on solutions that generate tangible results and impact. We believe that vector control is critical in our quest to achieve a malaria-free world. During the last 20 years, we've made great progress in the fight against malaria, and breaking the mosquito transmission cycle has proven to be the most effective approach in malaria control. However, we are currently faced with so many challenges. Today's webinar themed 125 years of fighting mosquitoes, what needs to change? We'll take a hard look at the state of vector control in 2022, which is 125 years since Ronald Ross' discovery that female anopheline mosquitoes transmit malaria between humans. We will delve into the challenges of malaria vector control interventions, explore new cutting-edge tools and the opportunities to improve coordination and efficiency of malaria efforts. Today, we will hear from leaders and experts who are working to address challenges in vector control and developing innovative and more effective solutions. Their insights and lessons learned are needed now more than ever. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to say a big thank you to our audience for joining us from across the globe. We will have some time for audience Q&A in the course of the meeting. Please use the Q&A function if you want to ask questions or provide comments. Your contributions are welcomed. Forthwith, I would like to welcome Leslie Ann Long. She's the President and CEO of GBC Health for our welcome remark. Leslie Ann, over to you.
Thank you, Achuko, and I'd like to add my thanks to all of our speakers today and all of you who've joined us for this discussion. We've got business leaders, senior government officials, non-profits, multilateral and philanthropic leaders around our virtual table. And together you signify what we mean when we speak about the huge benefits of partnership. We greatly appreciate that CAMA, as part of GBC Health, has the opportunity to work so closely with so many of you. GBC Health's vision is global health equity. Our mission is to leverage the full resources of the business community to meet today's most pressing global health challenges. Global health is no longer the concern of low and middle income countries alone. It impacts all of us. And we know that real challenges lie ahead: the looming climate crisis and its impact on health, the threat of antimicrobial resistance, the potential for future pandemics, and more. The risks need to be mitigated, and this is best done together. GBC Health is therefore launching Future United in September, a new initiative focused on harnessing the power of the private sector and others to fight for and achieve health equity in the context of these global challenges. Today, we're here more specifically to talk about the fight against malaria and what needs to change. The fight against malaria is one of the most challenging yet inspiring stories of our time, but the catastrophic impact of COVID-19 has rocked hard-won gains. And with disruption to supply chains and health systems, increasing insecticide and drug resistance, and the unpredictable impact of climate change, bold action is needed to turn the tide against one of the deadliest infectious diseases. CAMA is committed to that bold action and to work with all of you. It's only through coordinated effort that the world will achieve the ambitious malaria targets set for 2030. I'd like to thank all our CAMA members, and in particular our co-chairs, Access Bank and Chevron, for your collaboration and for your contribution to this work. Your commitment is unwavering. Through your and other CAMA members' support for the End Malaria Project in Nigeria, your engagement in conferences, workshops and webinars, and the intellectual capital that you bring to this space, you are demonstrating the leadership that's needed to ignite change. And change is what this conversation is about. So I'm very happy to hand over to our speakers to hear your insights and ideas. So Achuko, back to you to facilitate the conversation.
Thank you, Leslie Ann, for that beautiful remark. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I just want to be sure that you could hear me. So now we'll go into the panel of today's discussion. Joining me on this panel includes 6 amazing speakers. Melinda Hardy, she's the Director of Market Development and Access, Public Health Vestergaard. We have Mrs. Putube Owusu Akwofi. She's a medical entomologist and National Malaria Elimination Control Program, Ghana. And we have Andrew Deyi Schweibel. He's the African Regional Coordinator of Innovative Vector Control Consortium, IVCC. And we have Justin Macbeth, the Global Market Manager, Vector Control Bayer. We have Samuel Asedu, Director of Anglo-Goda Shanti, Malaria Control Program in Ghana. And then the last but not the least, Jennifer Ameis-Ted. She's a Vector Control Team Lead, USAID President's Malaria Initiative. Thank you all for joining us. So we will start with a question that actually epitomizes the theme of today's events. And it goes to all the speakers. So after 125 years, as we all know, we're still struggling, and malaria is still pervasive. Why are we where we are? What stops us from defeating malaria? What are the challenges? What are the issues? And what is the role of IRS and ITN in this fight? I will call on Melinda Hardy to respond to this first. Melinda?
Great. Thank you very much, Ochuko, and also thank you to CAMA and GBC Health for the opportunity to be part of this panel. It's a big question, and especially as one of the largest manufacturers of long-lasting nets, it's to recognize how much a tool like long-lasting nets have contributed to the overall vector control effort with other interventions as well, but also recognize that there are still challenges to be addressed. And I know I'm supposed to keep this short, so I think we can elaborate on some of these themes in really understanding more deeply throughout how does a product like long-lasting nets deliver this prevention throughout its product life cycle. And I think there are bigger questions around data. Where are the data gaps in malaria prevention? What are the areas that remain to be tackled, and having the data to delve into that? And this could include insecticide resistant challenges and other areas. And so I'm really looking forward to, I think, discussing these areas further in this conversation today. And no doubt that a tool like long-lasting nets will continue to be part of the core of the tools in the fight against malaria and offering really essential malaria prevention services. But we know we need to build on top of that, understanding what more this specific product can do in vector control, and add to that in the suite of interventions and hopefully innovation to come as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you for that response. The next, I will call on Mrs. Otube to also respond to the same question.
I share in Melinda's challenge. It's a very big question to answer in 2 minutes. Yeah. So from your introduction of Ronald Ross, after that, the question that scientists have been meaning to answer is, from when the link was established, where do the mosquitoes come from? Where are they going, and everything in between? And that brings us to innovations such as ITNs, such as IRS. One thing that we have not done too well, or we have not gone deep into, is the question of where the mosquitoes coming from. So we are talking about the breeding sites. So as governments, as individuals, how are we contributing to the very first source of our problem, where the mosquitoes are coming from? And one other reason why we are still in this fight is the issue that Melinda mentioned of insecticide resistance. The other is the behavior of people towards control measures, such as ITNs and IRS. We are beginning to see people refusing for their homes to be sprayed. We are beginning to see people refusing to use the nets, though we have good evidence that the nets and the ITNs do reduce the prevalence and the incidence of malaria to a large extent. We still have these challenges that we face. The other thing is the mosquito behavior. So once we put in interventions such as ITNs and IRS, we see over time that, again, the mosquitoes are beginning to change the way they react to these control measures. They are also trying to survive, you know. And so at the end of the day, we have to always come back to the drawing tables on the interventions that we use and how we can defeat malaria. I will end here so that the others can add up.
Thank you, Mrs. Otube. You said so much. And then I like the question that you posed. Where are the mosquitoes coming from? We need to really answer that question. Yeah, Andrew Schweibel from IVCC.
Thanks and good day to everyone. I'm a co-panelist. So a lot has already been said, but the key thing to also acknowledge is the fact that the current key vector control tools are IRS and nets. What role have they played? I think we know that in between 2000 and 2015, that's estimated that malaria control interventions have averted over 600 million cases, of which 78% can be attributed to nets and IRS. Why are we where we are? Thanks to the international donors who have also contributed immensely in Sub-Saharan Africa to where we are, right? Despite the science, we know that malaria has gone beyond just a medical condition. Did we give that amount of attention to it? I don't think so. And I also think that the mosquito is the smartest insect. So whilst you are developing new tools to control it, it's also devising ways to adapt and live beyond whatever new tools you are coming in. Key thing that just followed up from what Otubia said, I think that we are where we are despite the progress being made, because malaria control elimination is donor-driven in most sub-Saharan African countries. And until countries take ownership in funding their interventions and prioritizing it, I think we are not going to make a lot of progress. We are going to still be stuck. Thanks to the industry partners like Bayer, Sumitomo, Vestergaard, and what have you. This is not a lucrative business for them. So, but they are contributing their quota as part of a public health intervention, right? So we need a lot of resources to be channeled into that to ensure that the uptake is very maximized. Having made the last comment will be that we need to maximize the available tools, because it takes a long time to have a product come into the product pipeline. A new product or technology coming in the vector control does not take less than 10 years. This has a lot of cost implications, and this is something that we need to look at. So I think that progress has been made, but we need all hands on deck to be able to control malaria, eliminate malaria in Africa. And I know that we know these are the key interventions. Unfortunately, there's evidence to show that there's scale down of some of these proven impactful interventions across, but particularly in the area of IRS. And I'm sure Otubia and her colleagues within the leading the vector control sphere in sub-Saharan Africa would agree with me in this case.
Wow, thank you, Andrew. You made some very salient points. Well, move on to our next speakers. We will unpack some of the things you're saying. I like what you said about donor-driven. That is very loud. Yes, very loud. So we'll move on to our next speaker, Justin Markberg. Justin, you want to chime in here?
Thanks, Achuku. Hello, everybody, and thanks GBC for hosting this this panel, and greetings to my fellow panelists. It's nice to see some familiar faces on the panel here. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I'm certainly going to echo some of the things that have been said by my colleagues before me, but maybe I'll just rephrase that into some slightly different wording. I think there's obviously, in terms of what's stopping us, there's a significant element of the, I think it was it a movie, Jurassic World or Jurassic Park? There was a person within that who said, nature finds a way. And ultimately, we're dealing with biological systems, with mosquitoes, with parasites, with climate conditions and other things, which ultimately means there are ways in which nature and evolution puts themselves a step ahead of where we're at. And when you have a situation with finite or limited resources at the same time, which ultimately is the case in any environment or industry or market in which you're operating, having limited and finite resources and trying to also keep a step ahead of nature finding a way is obviously a big challenge, especially also when it's really important to make sure those resources are used in a sound way and with appropriate evidence and data to support their usage. So this element of evolution, nature being a step ahead, and ultimately us having to have the right decisions, the right evidence to support changes in what we're doing is obviously a challenge. So IRS and NETs are obviously recognized and proven core interventions. Some of the things which stop us, we know, is the mosquito biology, which makes it difficult for NETs and IRS to do what they need to do. And it's really, I think, quite encouraging and exciting that there's the prospect of new interventions on the horizon. So that's at least an illustration of, we're trying to keep up. We're trying to keep ahead of nature, but she's still a few steps ahead of us. So I'll close there. Just nature finding a way and matching the need to use finite resources with enough evidence to support judicious use of those. Thank you.
Sound. Thank you, Justin. I'll move on to our next, Samuel Asiedo from Anglo-World Ashanti.
Thank you, and I do recognize all the contributions being made by other seasoned panelists. They haven't presented their points, one wonders if there is anything left. So I'll just go a little way what Justin has done, rephrase some of the things that they have said. I will twist the question a little bit and look at it from the point where, is it globally that we have not been able to do this, or is it largely in some portions of the globe? And I would say it's largely in some portions of the globe. Our malaria intervention is donor-driven. But if it is donor-driven, what are we doing in country, at the country level? What are we contributing? It might be small, but it's an effort. Every effort contributes. So you need local stakeholders. You need a private sector coming in strong. You need civil society coming in strong. You need the religious bodies coming in strong. You need traditional leaders coming in strong. And our government being much more responsible. Look at the approach that we put to COVID interventions. In as much as there were a lot of donor funding, all various heads of state or president or prime ministers wanted to present themselves as leading the interventions within their country. In Ghana, we had almost weekly or bi-weekly, bi-monthly updates from the presidency. No. And local partnership is very key. And the other thing that I would add to this is, I remember when malaria intervention was being scaled up in a large extent in Africa, you would have interventions such as the bed nets. And they say, distribute the bed nets to pregnant women and children under 5. Resources were not enough. If we could deploy much more than one intervention in one community, I believe we can have so much results. We can do 2 preventive, like the bed nets with serious larvicidin, and we can go mass drug administration by testing and treating, and other interventions that are proving to be good. China, Sri Lanka, and many other countries have been able to eliminate. What did they do? And what are we doing differently from our side? Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, for making us rethink, tweaking that question. Yes, multisectoral partnership is key. We all know that. And then also the role of learning from other countries, what has worked, what hasn't worked. And I'll come to that question for Ghana as a country. We need to learn, we need to understand what is working in Ghana, what is not working. And I'm sure there are other countries as well that's going through the same challenge that that you just mentioned, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. So we need to look inwards and see how we can tap into the resources that we have, because this is doable, the fight against malaria, ending the fight against malaria. So I think we can actually get this done. Our final response to this question is going to come from Jennifer Misted from PMI. Jennifer, over to you.
Great, thank you. Happy to round out this first question. I think my fellow panelists have really provided comprehensive responses to the problem. I'll take a step back and as a donor, I think take the 30,000-foot perspective on things, which is where we often sit, right? When we're thinking about how to contribute to malaria. I think we can all agree we've seen massive progress in the fight towards malaria. I think we know that vector control in particular, nets and IRS have contributed to the vast majority of cases averted. It's a huge tool in our toolbox in the fight against malaria. But from where we sit, we know that the resources are insufficient. We know that coverage is not what we want it to be. Costs are going up and population is growing. So this is sort of a trifecta of things coming together that, not surprisingly, may be stalling our efforts in this regard. We still have around 25% of households that need a bed net don't have a bed net. And this goes beyond vector control. We know it's probably around 2/3 of women who should be receiving preventive treatment during pregnancy aren't receiving it. Probably around 40% of severe malaria cases in children aren't getting prompt treatment. So we know there are gaps in the coverage of our services. At the same time, the US has been committed to sustaining it and when possible, increasing our commitments to the fight against malaria through both the President's Malaria Initiative and also the Global Fund. But the total contributions globally are around 3 billion annually, and that's been the case for about the past 10 years. But the estimates that we have for what we need is more than twice that amount. And so the comments about where do these resources come from is a really important question. And I think it ties in closely with this idea of who's owning these programs, who's going to push them forward. And I think that's probably a big part of it, along with the innovations that were touched on previously, the additional challenges related to insecticide resistance, changes in vector behavior. I think also introductions of new vectors into the Horn of Africa could potentially be a problem and a new way we have to think about how we deploy our interventions, which interventions are the right ones to use. And then I think Justin touched on climate. We are dealing with repercussions of climate disasters, natural disasters, displaced populations, all of the above that will also have impacts on vector control. So I think at that, I will close. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was very comprehensive. And so I'll move on to Mrs. Otubi. We want to look at a country perspective. I'm happy that Ghana is represented here. Now we want to ask you a question: what has worked and what hasn't worked for Ghana in vector control interventions? And then let me just pick on the thread that I just heard from the first response to the first question. We heard limited resources, country ownership, prioritization. So my question to you as representing the government of malaria elimination of a country, how do you prioritize, ensure that malaria is at the top of the agenda with all the challenges that we have right now, limited resources? and the impact of COVID and all the challenges that we just mentioned. Yeah, so I know 5 minutes is pretty short, but if whatever you can do to address this in 5 minutes, I would appreciate. Thank you. Over.
Sorry, I was muted. I was saying you've added more to the question and maintained the time. I'll try. So when it comes to prioritization, just like most of the speakers mentioned, we have PMI in country, we have the global fund in country, and we have some funding also for the government. So PMI, global fund mainly for IRS and ITNs and some other surveillance activities. And we have the government supporting with larviciding across board. So just recently we had the launch of the Parliamentary Malaria Caucus Committee. And the whole agenda of the committee is supposed to push malaria, push funding towards malaria. And this happened just this year. So we are hoping that they will do their work well and probably be able to put together more resources than we have, just like Mr. Siedu alluded to. The more we are able to have funding from in-country, the more we can do things, the more we can expand the scope of the vector control interventions that we have. So back to the initial question of what has worked. So for some time now, we've had IRS in country, and we did a study in one of the districts that PMI funded. And it was very clear that once we have an insecticide that works, an insecticide that the mosquitoes have not begun or are resistant to, we are able to reduce the incidence of malaria by to about some 20% from 52%. So this is a big drop. So it's very clear that IRS works. Because of time, I will mix the issues up a little. But the issue with that is that Ghana did a stratification exercise to be able to know which vector control intervention goes. We used mainly the disease burden from the various districts, and we looked at the interventions that were available, and we tried to put in the various districts. And we realized that with the disease burden that we have, and with the ability of IRS to reduce malaria that drastically, we would need to increase IRS coverage to about 18 more districts. We knew this about 2 or 3 years ago, but as we speak now, we still have not been able to do that because of, again, the issue with funding. And again, we also know that IRS is able to, aside the epi part, when it comes to the ento part, it's also able to reduce the number of mosquitoes that are actually infectious and can transmit malaria. We know this as well. And so we are very confident in IRS. Our only challenge is with the scope and our ability to expand to all the areas that we need to. When it comes to ITNs have also worked for the country, and it's been able to show, we've been able to show that if people use ITNs consistently every night, and they sleep in the ITNs every night, we are able to reduce malaria all-cause mortality to about 17% from where we are now. And so we have proved that ITNs work. Our challenge, however, with ITNs is the issue, not coverage, because Ghana is blessed in a way. We've been able to get 3 different types of nets into the country. And so when we do mass campaign, for example, we are able to cover the whole country with giving at least 2 nets per each household. The challenge is with people using it and preference for particular kinds of nets. So in Ghana, people prefer the softer nets to the hard nets. But again, because Ghana as a country is not able to procure all the nets that we need, and we are donor dependent, we end up being dictated to as to the type that we can buy or the type we can procure, knowing very well that people would end up not using it because they've already told us they don't want that type. So that is one challenge we have, and we are still dealing with it. But ITNs have worked for Ghana as well. Most in recent times, we've had larviciding as well. This has been funded by the government in limited number of districts. The breeding sources are all over the country, but we are only able to do larviciding in 105, prioritizing urban areas. And this has also so far has worked. It's relatively new, so we are still putting together the data to be able to push the agenda and probably get more donor funds into larviciding. The other new thing we have done is entosurveillance. We have been able to set up sentinel sites across the country, and we pick data from these sites every month on mosquito abundance, the mosquito kind, mosquito meal analysis, etc. And at the end of the day, we use these data that we collect, including the data that comes from the epidemiology side, to make decisions as to where to put which vector control intervention, where to increase. Okay, let me not go into case management, but when it comes to vector control, that is what we do. We also have—
Thank you, Mrs. Otube. I think we'll have another round of questions, and we'll be able to get you to address some of the areas that you want to cover. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, you've said so much that we have an idea, and I think you're doing a brilliant job in Ghana compared to some countries that are still struggling. And well, hopefully we can do better, even in terms of access, utilization of the bed nets, like you mentioned. So I'll move on to my next speaker, Jennifer Amistad from PMI. We know that PMI is the largest government program leading the global fight against malaria. In your funding efforts, similar question I asked Mrs. Otube: what has worked and what hasn't worked? And what are your priorities moving forward? Let's keep it short and sweet. Over.
Great, thank you. I'll do my best to keep it short. We talked in the last question about IRS and ITNs, and the fact is they remain the core interventions that PMI supports. Our mandate from US Congress is to scale up proven interventions for malaria control and prevention. So we do tend to adhere to support for quote unquote proven interventions, which we could have a whole other webinar on that particular topic, but I'll leave it at that for now. So I think we continue to support those, but recognize the need to expand our tool set for the fight against malaria. And more recently, based on operational research conducted by PMI and others, have expanded our support for additional tools, including larviciding, in both elimination context as well as for anopheline Stevens-eye control specifically. We're still in the progress of generating evidence for a more broad guidance or recommendation for larval source management in other contexts. We also now procure and distribute topical repellents for protection of mobile migrant populations, particularly forest workers in elimination settings. So we are trying to expand as new evidence comes about. So I think part of the prioritization from PMI's perspective is moving as quickly as we can to create guidance and recommendations for new tools as they become available. We've always partnered with national malaria control programs to support implementation of their national strategy for malaria control. As was just mentioned for Ghana, that largely ends up being nets and IRS in some countries, but the foundation is also entomological surveillance. We've prioritized data collection. I think at this point we support data collection from over 300 sites in 27 countries. I think a good majority of data on resistance is coming from PMI supported sites, and I think the data is a huge priority for us to help programs select the appropriate tools, both in terms of types of net as well as types of insecticides for IRS. I think what has changed more recently is sort of a shift away from a one-size-fits-all approach, which I think we can all agree at this point is not working. We really have switched gears to promote tailoring of interventions. Otuvia just talked about the stratification exercise in Ghana. I think we are very much now looking towards using data, be it from routine data collection, operational research, or even modeling to help inform deployment of interventions based on these data sets. It both maximizes resources, hopefully, as well as impact of the tools that we have. I think I'll wrap it up there just to save on time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. So at this point, I will switch gears towards challenges currently facing vector control. We've mentioned a couple already. Resistance is one of them. Another is supply chain. And we know the impacts that COVID had on supply chain issues around the world. And so my next question is going to Melinda Hattie from Vestergaard. We know that IT and manufacturing and distribution need strong supply chain and systems. How has those systems stood up amidst the current challenges? What can be done to mitigate against these challenges and to make ITN more available and accessible to those that need them? Over, Melinda.
Thanks, Achuka. Another good question here. And just jumping on from all this discussion around the big efforts made to design control programs. Indeed, I can only agree that to ensure that communities have the timely access to the malaria prevention tools, such as things like nets, absolutely relies on a strong supply chain system. And I've, like others during this time of the pandemic, come to appreciate that such a system really requires a great deal of communication, coordination, all the way from production planning to transportation, warehousing, and ultimately distribution to reach the communities and families in need. And disruption of any one step in this process can disrupt the availability and access to things like prevention tools. So when I was listening to Otuvia speak just now on these efforts to design the program with malaria burden and mosquito, entomological mosquito data as well, also keeping in mind, I think, preference, such as these soft nets that could also drive optimal usage, then we become also critically aware and listening to these challenges that something such as a long lead time is really a pain point and could compromise the timing of things like net distributions for NMCP. So as a long-lasting net manufacturer, absolutely our goal is to ensure what you said in the question there is to ensure a reliable supply chain. And by and large, throughout the pandemic, and I have to give credit to my colleagues in Vestergaard who work with the global procurement agencies and who are in contact with NMCPs, we've by and large been able to mitigate these potential challenges and deliver the orders in full and on time of our permanent products. That said, there's inevitably always an opportunity to continue to find ways to learn from the broader lessons of the pandemic and find ways that manufacturers of nets like ourselves, or perhaps even other malaria commodities in general, to further mitigate these risks and increase access. And for instance, discussions on understanding of needs, forecasting, strategic discussions and around supply chain collaborations and so forth. I want to come back a little bit to the theme. Don't worry, I will tie it to the supply chain question here. Justin, I think you've framed it so perfectly. I can only quote you at this point, that nature finds a way. And I'm always thinking the evolution of mosquitoes, what's really continuing to drive transmission and ensuring what's the suite of products. It's already been mentioned in this discussion so far. What's the types of products that we need in addition to this reliable supply of these products to stay ahead of this ever evolving mosquito. And the big news in nets, I thought I'd just take a moment to flag that. and the recent results coming out of Tanzania on the additional protective efficacy that's offered by a net such as Interceptor G2, which is a dual active ingredient net with a new mode of action introduced with clofenapir, are so encouraging. And this has also encouraged a company like Vestigard to expand its long-lasting net portfolio. We've got a new permanent product, which was submitted to WHO for assessment just about a year ago now. And it's that suite of products where, in order to be able to make those product choices, in our case, it's on nets, but also to bring that and offer that to enable NMCP programs, such as the one that Tubia described. It's to bring that capacity to offer these different net types and also meet the needs as the growing evidence that we can address insecticide resistance, look to building towards insecticide resistant management strategies of the future, perhaps. And we want to bring our capacities to enable to meet the shift towards more effective LLINs for malaria prevention and these tailored malaria programs with potentially other interventions. Ultimately, we're here today for malaria prevention and to really bring the burden down for families and communities that need it most. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Your response actually paved the segue for the next question, which is going to go to Andrew Schweibel, talking about current tools that can help fight resistance. So Andrew, I know IVCC is working on a number of projects, and one of them is the NGI-RS. How do you think this initiative will overcome the challenges of insecticide resistance? And what are the current tools that can help addressing resistance? Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Ochiko. I think the engineers project is the next generation IRS project, which was primed by IVCC and funded by Unit Aid. Typically, that project has come to an end, but the gains are still in the pipeline that is still growing. So the purpose of that project was to be able to establish a sustainable and a growing market for new products, long-lasting products in the market. So tailoring that just to be able to create a demand, create market stability, and also make competition, create competition within the market sphere, and also make these products available. So that project ended in 2019. However, what I would call the children of that project is still existing because new products came in through the market. We had the OPs that came into the market. So we're talking about italic, you have the clothianidins that came into the market thanks to all the industry partners who we have Bayer here. We have the Flodoran Fusion, we have Sumishield all being the market. This created a very good market sphere in the sense that the competition led to price reduction, also led to an uptake of IRS in some countries. The other thing that also was very significant, these are long-lasting products. Previously, there were products that were lasting between 3 to 4 months, but these were products generally that are lasting between 6 to 10 months, in some cases a bit more. I might put that as a caveat because this might differ from country to country. I see Jane here, so this might differ country to country, but to a large extent, I think that has created a kind of market share for it. Secondly, because it's lasting over the transmission period, countries do not have to spray over two times in a year. So that contributed to saving costs. So these products are there in terms of IRS. And I know Melinda mentioned as to what is in the pipeline. She mentioned the Interceptor G2 nets. Yes, that's in the pipeline, which is also being piloted with funds from Unit Aid and Global Fund and other partners, including PMI, that to be able to generate evidence to help WHO in terms of policy guidelines and also create the market. So there's EPI data that is being collected. There is ENTO data that is being collected both in terms of randomized clinical trials and also operational studies that's been going on in over 10 countries. Again, the results are looking promising, just as spoken by Melinda. Having said that, we've looked at IRS, we've looked at nets, which are all indoor, right? Now, there was also what I call the attractive sugar base, which is going to look at issue about outdoor biting, because there's data to support that outdoor biting is also becoming a problem in most parts of the sub-Saharan Africa, and also contributing a lot to that. So we have that in the product pipeline. Having said that, we are other innovative ways. I know, again, this is being led by PMI. I know one study was done in Ghana where they did a partial spray to be able to see what would be the results. And I think the results coming out from Ghana showed a very remarkable performance, that when half of the room or the sleeping place is sprayed, it could contribute to reduce cost close to 30% effectiveness. I know there's some studies also ongoing in Cote d'Ivoire, but the findings are not yet out to the best of my knowledge. So, but these are some innovative ways that are ongoing. Having said that, there's also what is called the IK Smart Light, which is a self-training tool that I call, you can self-train or self-ovate. It can also be used throughout the IRS operations. This is also trying to assure that there's efficiency and there's cost reduction on it. So these are some of the tools that we have in there that are currently, but these are not currently available in the market yet. The IK Smart Light, the Royal nets, and the subdue G2 nets. This, as I said, is landed a new net project, which once the study is finished and the project comes to an end in September, we hope to be able to get a policy guidelines or recommendation from WHO, which would now be available for all other countries to put into a part there. So I might stop here and then maybe take some questions later.
Thank you, Andrew. So drilling it down to IRS as an intervention, I will pose this next question to Justin. From an IRS product developer and manufacturer perspective, and perhaps taking into account what other panelists have said so far, what are some of the challenges and opportunities facing the range of choice in IRS product availability in the future? And how can new products be designed to better address these challenges? Justin?
Yeah, thanks, Chuku. And I'm looking at the time. I'm guessing that I've probably got about a minute to answer this question rather than the 5. I'll try and do it as smoothly and as quickly as possible. I think let me start off by saying, I think, you know, from a manufacturer's perspective, we try and look at things at sort of like a 10-year horizon, because taking into account, I think it was Andrew or somebody said that, you know, realistically, a new product development is somewhere in the vicinity of 4 to 5 years. So for the first half of that 10 years is development, and there's no recoup on investment. And then the second 5 years is really where there's the opportunity to do that. So then let's look at the 10 years horizon in terms of the malaria map. I think we would all hope and keep our fingers crossed and touch as much wood as possible that the malaria map in the next 10 years is going to be contracting and contracting dramatically. We all want to see that. That means, you know, touching on what Atubia said, you know, there's also hopefully more capacity to do these stratifications in countries and really look at the tools which are going to be appropriate in the contracting environment and where transmission intensity is coming down from, you know, high to moderate to low, which of course has an impact on the range of tools which are going to be chosen to be used. And with IRS being pretty operationally heavy, I think we all recognize that creates a tremendous amount of pressure on how much IRS is going to remain in the future. And also looking at maybe perhaps one of the roles that IRS has played in the past, where there's been more modes of action available in IRS to contribute towards resistance management over and above what's happening with nets. But of course, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, more modes of action being available on nets and having more dual AI nets available. So what does that mean in terms of then the emphasis and focus on IRS? So I think in terms of challenges, it's obviously potentially a smaller market, but I think there's a good thing in that because it forces more innovation. So I think it's really important for IRS manufacturers to focus on, when they're looking at new modes of action, to look at modes of action which probably aren't going to be used on nets, to maintain a valuable position for resistance management. So there's a good fit between nets and IRS. also to look at costs. You know, I think we'd realistically look at the future of IRS and think the product costs are going to have to be slightly different in new product designs. And I'm sure there'll be people with smiles on their faces when they hear manufacturers say that we're looking at, you know, IRS products with potentially different price profiles in 5-6 years' time. So I think there's some positive things. So obviously, you know, those sorts of potentially shrinking market, more competition forces more innovation, which is a positive thing for those that ultimately are the receiving end and the use of the products. I think some of the opportunities obviously come from the likes or the good that organizations like IBCC are doing in terms of funding different developments or contributing towards funding of different developments for truly new AIs. That's a positive thing. And maybe just, you know, final thing just to close, I think the, you know, based on the ongoing expectation that resistance is going to continue to be an evolving challenge and nature continuing to find a way, that we've got to continue to look at smart ways to preserve the modes of action that we have available, and probably more emphasis on IRS with combinations in the future than standalone products to preserve the effectiveness of those new modes of action which become available. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin, for sticking to time. Your preservation is key. And as I hear about new products and tools that are being rolled out into the market or that will be coming up, I think efficiency, as Andrew mentioned, is very important. And then cost reduction. We know some of the challenges that we've had, especially on some of the tools that we have currently. And so that is something that needs to be looked at from the manufacturers in the room. And then my next question will go to Anglo Gold Ashanti. I know almost every one of us here know about Anglo Gold and how the huge project they have, and that's been ongoing for years in Ghana. Very exemplary malaria control program. Can you share with us, Samuel, how you have been able to sustain your interventions despite all the challenges that we have facing us left, right, and center? And as a profit-driven organization, how are you able to sustain what you're doing? And then how have your collaboration, we want to learn about your collaboration, which is quite exemplary, how you've been able to collaborate with Ghana NMCP over the years, impacts that made and lessons learned. Samuel?
Thank you, Ochiko. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. So Anglo Gold Ashanti has been doing indoor residual spraying for the past 16 years. And they don't hope to stop now until probably we see all the collective efforts coming together to see malaria being eliminated. We've had some remarkable success, and it's due to the great financial support that the mother company, Anglo Gold Ashanti, has contributed, and also what we have received from the Global Fund. Agama was the first private sector entity to receive funding from the Global Fund. And it also became possible because we have great collaboration with our partnership with National Malaria Control Program, the entity responsible for malaria policy formulation and its management. Now they are changing the name from malaria control to malaria elimination. We share data, we have a lot of meetings, they see us as a significant partner, and we see them as the owners of the policies, and they draft the policy, invite us, we have input into it. And that great partnership has significantly contributed to this success. Impact has been great due to efficient monitoring or surveillance system that we have in place. We measure what we do. Hence, the decisions are based on science and in line with the national policy. It's not as an individual feels or how an individual wants it to go. It should be science-based. It should relate to the national policy or national guidelines. Again, Anglo Gold Ashanti is a business entity, and our approach to the malaria intervention is like a business. You produce results, get the results out there. And if results are not coming in, then we have to identify what are the causes, and then we have to rectify that. I do remember at the end of the quarter, from the health facility, Anglo Ashanti Foundation, where they provide clinical services. Data is compiled on how malaria cases are going up. And if the cases are going up, you would then be called to answer a few questions. So if you don't want cases to go up, you ensure that the work being done is done appropriately. And again, if you are doing the intervention in the name of Anglo Ashanti, irrespective of the location you are implementing it, either in Obuasi or in the entire Upper West, results are being monitored, and therefore you have to ensure that work gets done. The other thing that has also contributed to great success that we can share around will be partnership. I would say partnership is key, and it's one of the core values of Agama. We have local partnership, local authorities, traditional leaders, youth groups, the religious leaders in the church and in the mosque, state agencies, local government, and everyone, and every recognizable entity in our area of operation is recognized, and we have to get into partnership in order to enhance. You know, you go to everybody's bedroom to do the spraying, and if you have to allow me to do the spraying in your bedroom, then you have to trust me that I can really get in there and come out safe, and also ensure that you are safe. Spraying your house for over 15 years, which means you have a lot of trust in me. And we have to do things to ensure that your trust in me is not broken and is shared broadly. The other one I would add in is our enthusiastic staff. They desire to see the results. When we don't hit targets, they are not too happy with it. They would like to ensure that work is done, go on monitoring, ensure that houses that are supposed to be sprayed are being sprayed. Those who are refusing their houses to be sprayed, they are following them up. And I'm having great conversation, going all length, ensuring that you have great coverages, which will reflect in community protection and will reflect in having malaria cases going down. I'll pause here. These are some of the things that we have learned. Partnership is key.
Thank you, Andrew. I was just taking notes, scribbling, like you are a walking knowledge about malaria programming. Seriously, we can go on and on, just trying to glean from your experience. So you mentioned partnership, impact as well, trust among stakeholders, and enthusiastic staff. That is key. Thank you so much for sharing. I would encourage the audience to please bring in your questions, put them on the Q&A chat box. We're almost going to get to the Q&A session. So please keep your questions and comments coming in. Thank you. And then our final questions to the panelists before we take questions from the audience. I will split these questions into two. Let me split two. So the first set of questions will be addressed by 3 speakers, and the other one will be addressed by 3 speakers. So let's do this. The first question, in your view, what is one practical way of enhancing call vector control interventions? Just 1 minute per speaker. So I'll start with Melinda. What is one practical way of enhancing call vector control interventions?
Being focused in here on one, okay. So
yeah, one.
I mean, I think I want to reiterate and put the attention on the need to have the funding pot really overall to finance these core interventions and enable the further targeting and thinking about these strategies to come. But since I come from the voice of a long-lasting net manufacturer, I think I want to emphasize the word you utilize in your question there is enhancing. And I'm looking at this actually more from a overall product lifecycle system. And there's been so many opportunities that data itself drives, I think, understanding what is the maximal malaria protection offered by NETs and IRS. And I would like to envision that this data gets to a point that this forms a feedback loop also. And so we're really encouraged, and this is an effort that one thing that Vestigard's really trying to delve into is an effort of post-market monitoring as well. So monitoring in real time of our product to ensure that it's supposed to do as we intend it to. And that being, I think, part of the additional data layer that's been discussed in lots of different angles by this panel today, is one way, I think, to focus it on one thing you're asking me to choose here, is to really enhance, I think, the data in understanding what our tools are doing, this feedback to understand what the gaps and challenges are, and maybe this gives opportunity to for product developers and manufacturers like ourselves to understand user needs as well, especially since it might drive key behaviors. And in the spirit, I suspect I've snuck in two other things, but in the spirit of this collaboration and cooperation underpinning all of that.
Thank you, Melinda. I'll pose some question to Justin from Bayer. Yeah, what is one practical way of enhancing co-vector control to interventions?
There was me expecting to be asked the second question. I was looking at the sequence of speakers. I wasn't expecting that random question. Okay.
If you would prefer that, I'll leave you for that session. But I just thought this may make more sense for you since you are, yeah.
No, I think I'll echo a little bit of what Melinda said, and I think some of this has been said before. Ultimately, the enhancement of impact obviously comes from understanding the best use of those tools in the specific situations where they need to be used. And I think Jennifer also touched on this in some of the things that she said. So where possible, local data, or as local as possible, supporting relevant local use. I'll stop there. That's about as pragmatic as I can make it, I think.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, and short and sweet. The same question goes to Andrew, IVCC.
So just following up from data that drives about impact, it is time, Ochiko, and I think you know that IVCC is working with KAMA, Anglo-Gold Ashanti, to be able to drive the private sector, right? I think we've all come to accept that there's funding gap. So how do we use the data to be able to approach private sector to know that once they invest in vector control, they would get a return on investment, because there's a return on investment when malaria is eliminated, which is huge. So I think that is what my key thing I want to put on board, to be able to complement what the donor community is doing. I think that is key. And I throw the challenge out to anybody on the platform. We are happy to discuss that in addition to what is already ongoing between IVCC, KAMA, Anglo-Gold Ashanti in a couple of countries, including Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda, and DRC.
Thank you, Samuel. And the next question will be taken. Thank you. If there is one thing you could change about how vector control is currently being tackled globally, please let us know. What would you propose? First, Jennifer Armistead from PMI.
Great, thanks. So, I mentioned in my previous comment about how, we really do strive to partner with countries and national malaria control programs to support their strategies for malaria control. I think there are ways we can do that better. And I think there's a large initiative, not just within PMI, but within USAID at large for all programs, to put an emphasis on local ownership of these programs. And so I think from our perspective, we would like to see more community and local engagement. That might be through, direct support to research institutions. I'll add that we support probably 50 or 60 different local partners just for vector control. But I think we would like to see the ownership and implementation, not just of surveillance, but are there ways that we can transfer ownership of some of the programs we support for implementation over to some of these communities, local groups, et cetera. So I think that's a priority direction for us as an organization to move towards.
Thank you. Same question goes to Mrs. Otube, NMCP Ghana.
Okay, so short and sweet.
Thank you.
I would look at a more open-minded approach to vector control, looking at newer technologies, newer ways of doing things, locally driven, picking up from what Jennifer said, locally driven interventions that have been shown to work. and also asking ourselves the question of, in the other countries that have been able to eliminate malaria or do away with the parasite or the mosquito or whatever, what have they done? And why are we not trying to follow, since they have shown that it works, why are we not doing the same? So open-mindedness, yes, newer interventions, learning from what has been shown to work. Yeah.
Thank you. And then finally, Andrew Samuel from Anglo Ashanti, same question.
Right, I have 1 minute. I'm going to make it sweet and simple. I would look at it from enhancing vector control in our communities. I would go by, let's reduce the vector quantities in the community. Let's reduce the parasite living in human beings, and we can have great results. If we reduce the vector and we don't do much on the parasites in human reservoirs, human beings serving as reservoirs, just an effective bite can still give you malaria. So there's a need to have that three core joined together by research or surveillance that ensures that you are doing a little here, a little there to enhance the results that we have. And to put all together, let's invite many more people to come into the fold. Partnership, private sector, civil society, local leadership, government, government agencies, political leadership, political will, government itself putting a lot of resources into malaria interventions. That's what I would give you in 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists. From the questions, we see that there's so much interest in this topic, and we have tons of questions. In addition to what we have on the Q&A box, we've had questions that were shared with us prior to the event. So we will dive right into the questions. I see that some of you are already typing to respond to some of the questions, but the ones that have not been responded to, I'll just take it off so we will respond ASAP. One question that's of interest to me here is about the malaria vaccine. I'm sure that panelists have seen the question. How do the results look today, and what is the projection as to how this will impact elimination and project timeline? I don't know who to pose this question to, so I would leave it open. Is there anyone of the panelists that would love to address this question on the malaria vaccine? Anybody? Wow. Should I call somebody? Do we have somebody that, yeah. Okay, I see Samuel responding or shaking his head. I think he wants to give it a try. So Samuel, go ahead.
Oh no, we have the professor of that. Otubia is a very versatile individual. And
okay, Mrs. Otube.
I was trying to avoid this one. Why did you mention my name? So I don't have an update on this, but what I know is that Ghana is one of the countries that began the whole process right from the lab to getting the vaccine to people and seeing how it works. I don't have an update on that, but it's something that the government is looking at adding to the EPI, the expanded program on immunization, the vaccines that we have out there for children, but we haven't gotten there yet. It's still in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you. And then there's another question here.
Chico,
yeah?
If you allow me, I can back Otubia up as well. I think given that Ghana was one of the pilot countries for the rollout of malaria vaccine efforts, one point that I just really stuck with when this was reported at the WHO Malaria Policy Advisory Group is that of access, and that so the vaccine was actually reaching people who for whatever reason had not accessed vector control, for instance. And I think that was a key example that you're going to be able to, or you're going to need to require your core interventions as part of the conversation we're having today. And actually, maybe perhaps one of the big opportunities for vaccines is communities that had no or limited malaria prevention. So I think the topic around vaccination is really speaking to what is the suite of interventions overall, in addition to vector control. So I thought I would just add that in.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then Melinda, one question to you, and one of the questions we got before the session is around manufacturing in Africa. So we've been talking about this for years, and that is one of the issues we're still facing. What is stopping mass IT and manufacturing in Africa?
I feel like I'm getting big questions overall today here. Look, this is a topic that I think we've heard and we're listening to, and I think looking around, and I have colleagues looking into these aspects, both in the way you've posed the questions, the practicality of it, the opportunity. And so this has been something that I can confirm that Vestigard, as one of the manufacturers, is exploring and actually posing the questions back and engaging with those topics, both at many levels. So within the malaria community as a large, so there is that discussion, for instance, in the rollback malaria community or ALMA, the African leaders community, and seeing what this looks like. There could be, there's both sides of the coin of any conversations, the advantages, the disadvantages, and really looking at this question from the point of view of security of supply. And I think that's as much as I can say today, except that, watching, listening, learning, and absolutely willing to engage on that topic.
Thank you. This question, I think Jennifer from PMI should answer this. Yeah, this whole area of donor-driven, donor-dependent, donor dictates. How do we shift this from this perspective? But I've heard it from different countries, and it's really a challenge. So how do we ensure that countries are actually supported and approaches are tailored to what the country needs to drive malaria interventions? Jennifer?
Yeah. This is the $1 million question. I think I can say lots of things. I think probably the best answer I can give you is we need to be better about listening. I think we need to allow the leaders in the countries that we support to tell us what they need, and we need to be a bit more open about listening to that. At the same time, we are accountable to, as a donor in the United States, we are accountable to not just the US Congress, but the US taxpayers, which is where our funding comes from. And we are beholden to results, and we do have to uphold the mandate that we're given, and we do have to generate results. And unfortunately, that means often taking a long time to generate the evidence before we can provide support for an intervention. And so I think it's finding the ways to do both of those things more efficiently is a start. But we have been very open to trying to listen to the needs. This discussion of larviciding was brought up earlier. I assure you we are doing our best internally to make changes slowly and steadily based on evidence for that particular intervention, as well as all the others that are coming down the pipeline. We all know bureaucracy moves slowly, and donors are no exception. It's usually for a reason. But I think listening, engaging in regular dialogue with the leaders in the countries that we are ultimately trying to serve is a huge part of it.
Yeah, I'm glad things are being done
Right.
to ensure that this is, because, we need to do something about it. Thank you for sharing what you're doing, and hopefully we're able to overcome this challenge soonest. My next question goes to Justin from Bayer. How can we ensure IRS acceptance and improve coverage? Justin?
Well, I think I'll take the second part of that in terms of coverage. I think finding ways to manage costs obviously helps with coverage. I think the cost per household if that's too much, obviously that limits coverage. I think the first part on impact, I think, we've got to keep on top of resistance. It comes back to data. It comes back to monitoring. It comes back to using the right products which are suitable for the situation where they're intended to be used. I'll keep it that simple, I think.
Thank you, Justin. So I have a question here as well that talks about multisectoral malaria approaches, which looks at housing, education. How can this be applied to reduce vector populations in novel ways? I think this is a very important question. Beyond the current, approaches that we have, how do we integrate the housing, education, and all of that, those components to ensure that we reduce the population of the mosquito? Who is willing to address this question? Anyone?
Right, let me start a little bit.
Thank you.
I personally believe we don't have one magic bullet that solves the malaria issue. And for every scientific way that we have, the researchers have been able to identify, bringing it on board helps to a large extent reduce the burden of malaria. So housing structures, yes, the issue of coming in with a multi-sectorial approach to malaria elimination is getting all sectors from state agencies to whatever we may find coming in. There is a need for us to even look at how do we do our drainage system? Do we still have the open gutters, areas that water would reside and mosquitoes can breed? How do we even look at our agriculture insecticides? How do we manage people coming in from malaria endemic areas? How do we do the testing when we get to the pre-elimination and then finally elimination stages? So there's a need for multi-sectorial approaches in coming in. Private sectors should be incentivized. Manufacturers producing and coming in with products, do we necessarily have to tax insecticide that is being used for public health interventions? Do we have to tax our nets that are coming in for malaria programs? And all sectors coming in would help. There is a need for a guidance on how our building structures should be done, having nets that will prevent insects from coming in, putting in ceilings, so that mosquitoes will not go through the eaves and come into the rooms to land, wait, and bite us for us to get malaria. So the multi-sectorial approach and multi-interventions, not just the bed nets, not just the IRS, not just larvicidin, but any approach that would help should be all put together, and the resources are needed to make this feasible. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
just to add to
thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Just to add to what Samuel said. So we're talking about improved housing. I think malaria too is an economic issue, right? Because again, we are talking about data, but if you looked at even each country where malaria is lowest, look at the economic status within those regions, right? So when people's economic status is improved, you're able to build better housing, better drainage, and making the environment unfavorable for the mosquito. So once the environment is unfavorable for the mosquito, I know it means it's not a breeding place for it. The other thing we probably also need to have to look at is the human behavior, right? That these tools that are out there, how are we maximizing the use of these tools? I think these are the two key things I want to add to that. But I think that there's also some work that is being done in the area of improved housing that we might share some data on later on. I think WHO is doing some work on improved housing, larvicidin, and then we can get more data on it and share with the team later on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have other questions, but first of all, I want to take a question from the floor, a comment from the floor from Mr. Philip Okoko. He's the head of vector control, National Malaria Elimination Program, Nigeria. We know the importance of Nigeria, the significance of Nigeria in the fight against malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. So I want to give him an opportunity to speak about just 2-3 minutes about vector control in Nigeria and how the private sector can support the concurrent efforts on the ground. Mr. Philip Okoko, please go ahead. Trying to unmute your mic. Yeah, you can speak.
Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, hello everybody, and we appreciate Dr. Chukwu for setting up this meeting. It's been quite thought-provoking, and I also had all the million-dollar questions that have come forth so far. But talking specifically about Nigeria and vector control in Nigeria, we all understand that Nigeria is contributing over a quarter of malaria cases and even malaria deaths in the world. And that places us at a very important position in terms of eradication efforts. A lot of efforts have been put into our vector control space. Traditionally, our core intervention has remained the mass distribution of ITNs. And lately, because of growing incidence of insecticide resistance, we've begun to try other newer technologies that are available in the market. Andrew did mention something around the NoNet project, and that's one project that we have leveraged upon in order to increase access to the newer technologies that have been available or that are becoming available across the globe, particularly Royal Guard, IG2, and of course, PBO that has gained more prominence over the last couple of years. By our strategic plan, one of the key things that we do or we plan to do in this phase of our elimination effort is use multi-pronged approaches in addressing vector control. So beyond just the distribution of mass distribution of ITNs in the country, one thing we have started doing is also targeted implementation of IRS. In the last 2 years, we've been able to do that, working with Mentor Initiative in Borno State, and we've been able to record good results in those places. Though it was not like a statewide application, but at least we focused on critical areas and around the internally displaced persons camps around Borno State in 3 local governments. And as of this year, we're able to even scale it up to include the host communities as well. Beyond that, we're also thinking of deploying targeted implementation of larval source management in certain areas, and PMI is beginning to support that effort in one of the states where we are increasingly having high malaria incidents, Kebbi State in northwestern Nigeria. And one of the things we've done so far is to do like a scoping work to check the feasibility of implementing LSM in that location. One particular characteristic of that state is that it's mostly agrarian, and they focus on rice farming. So you can imagine the number of mosquito breeding sites that will be generated from year to year in that location. So having this at the back of our mind, we thought it could be a very good ground where we could begin to deploy LSM control. Now, working with the private sector, thanks to IVCC, we are beginning to also, we've come up with what we call a business case, which we want to be able to sell to the private sector, riding upon some things that have happened in the past, like in Ghana, in Uganda, and a few other countries. We developed this business case in order to like catch the interest of the private sector to be able to bring in their funding, their support in different aspects. One of the things we did during the development of that business case was to do like a partnership matrix where we identified possible partners within the country and which areas they are able to support in order to carry this forward. We all know that doing IRS traditionally is a cost-intensive exercise, and one particular organization might not be able to carry it out on its own from year to year to year to year. So one way we could do it now is break it into bits and identify those that can handle the little bits that will make the whole at the end of the day. So those are some of our efforts so far in brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Philip. I'm glad you mentioned the current intervention that's ongoing in Borno State, partnership with Mentor Initiative. Just so you all know that project was sponsored, it's been sponsored by Bayer. And you've mentioned already that without partnership, we can get the job done. So I'm happy that some sort of partnership is already ongoing, and hopefully we can scale that up across the country. Thank you so much. I know we are almost out of time, but we also have one speaker from the floor, and I would love, they have a very unique perspective on how they address mosquito population, target malaria. I know a lot of us know about them. I'll call on Birungi Merciga to just 2 minutes. We're almost out of time, to just share with us what they're currently doing in terms of reducing the mosquito population. Over.
Yes, thank you. So Target Malaria is an international consortium. We have partners from Africa, Europe, and North America. And our objective is to develop and share novel genetic technology using gene drive for the control of malaria vectors. So by doing that, we want to reduce the population of the mosquitoes that transmit malaria, thereby reducing the transmission of malaria within endemic countries. So gene drive is an approach that we want to be complementary to the existing methods. It would be helpful to them because you can target areas that the other methods may not quite cover. For example, one of our speakers mentioned things like the mosquitoes also trying to survive, adapting to our existing methods, also developing resistance. So when you have gene drive controlling the mosquito populations right from the root, then that means that if you have the mosquitoes that are biting outdoors, maybe where the nets are not covering, then you also have this intervention coming in there. And also it has no cross resistance to other interventions. So it means when you develop resistance, let's say to an insecticide, it doesn't mean that the gene drive would, stop working. So we're hoping that when we have this tool added to the toolbox with all our existing tools, then we have an even more powerful approach to reducing malaria transmission. So we are developing this tool to work both in urban and rural areas. It will work whether you have strong or weak health systems. And because it's basically mosquitoes controlling mosquitoes, it means you can use it both in stable and unstable areas because it can be released in a stable area and the mosquitoes will propagate even to the areas that you might not be able to easily access. Yes, so I only had 2 minutes.
Thank
I
you.
may not quite describe
Yes.
what gene drive is, but basically we want to introduce a modification that we want. In this case, for example, male bias, where mosquitoes are producing more males than females, and have a drive in there to make sure that it's inherited almost always 100% to the next generation. Briefly, that's what it is, but any more information can be gotten from targetmalaria.org.
Definitely. Thank you so much. There's so much to share on this topic, as we've seen. I wish we can go on and on, but time will not permit us. I just want to thank all our incredible speakers. You have been amazing today. You kept the time and you gave some very important points that we will go on with and still, continue the conversation beyond where we are. There's a number of things that we have to take out from this call as beyond just a talk. It's action to ensure that we're able to reduce the population of the mosquito and eventually get to malaria elimination. And I hope that you find this session very valuable as much as I did. At this point, I will call on Janice Davis Street She's a manager, Global Public Health and Special Project, and also a co-chair of CAMA, for a closing remark. Thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Chuku. I echo your thanks to our panelists for their very insightful contributions to the conversation today. I'd also really like to thank GBC and CAMA for the provocative question you posed as a topic for this really excellent webinar. The impacts of mosquito-borne diseases on death and disability are a really well-documented part of human history. Indeed, mosquitoes own the dubious honor of causing more deaths and disease than any other animal on the planet. Since the launch of the original Mosquito Day in 1897, mosquitoes have been implicated as a vector in a virtual alphabet soup of diseases, including chikungunya, dengue, West Nile virus, yellow fever, and Zika. And in the intervening years, you've also seen the intersections of malaria and mosquito-borne diseases with inequalities related to gender, economic development, and access to treatment and prevention. We have also seen, and we celebrated and heard, many of the innovations in vector control. I know today we focused on malaria and heard from partners in the fight for malaria prevention, understanding that in many countries, communities are battling malaria in addition to other mosquito-borne diseases. I think that's a sobering thought. Some of the challenges that really resonated, at least for me, were the social issues related to net use, changes in mosquito behaviors, and resilience of biological systems in nature. We heard about the importance of supply chain strengthening, political will, and throughout the session, the criticality of local partnerships. Answering many of the challenges was the mention of lessons learned, including leveraging data for prioritization, support of proven preventions, and expanding tools with the emergence of new science. I think a continuing challenge for the public health community will be the emergence of other diseases that will compete for resources for preventative efforts. Regardless of the challenges discussed today, I think we in the public and private sector and in civil society must continue to partner in our efforts to increase awareness and education, and to make sure that we continue to mobilize resources to prevent and mitigate the impacts of malaria and mosquito-borne diseases on health across the globe. Thank you all for your contributions to the conversation. This was an excellent event.
Thank you so much, Janice. Like I mentioned, we will take it discussion from online to action, and we will engage with you all and continue the conversation. Reach out with key outcomes from the meeting and even the videos, and it will be shared in a few days' time with everyone. Thank you so much for your contributions and participation. We look forward to engaging in future conversations. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thank you and bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.